Folks, good day. Welcome to Learning Thursdays. As you can read, they're offered to our professionals as a free learning opportunity with the goal of hoping to improve the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of the New York State addiction workforce as we're out there striving to improve the lives of individuals who are in prevention, treatment, and recovery services across the state. This month's presentation is the intersection sex trafficking, trauma, and substance abuse. Our presenters today are Jagruti Shah, who is a licensed clinical social worker, and Rita Abadi, who is a licensed mental health counselor. Learning Thursday's presentations, folks, are free of charge and typically approved for 1.5 credentialing hours. Once you've been registered, you will receive an email. The email will contain a link for the broadcast, the PowerPoint and any handouts, a sign-in sheet, and a credentialing certificate. As Learning Thursdays are usually presented the third Thursday of each month, that's when you can look to expect this email. Remember, there's a sign-in sheet and you have to send it in to the address noted on the form, as that will be your only verification that you've attended the presentation in its entirety. And what we would ask you to do is type or write your name in the space provided on the certificate. That's what you will eventually have to send to credentialing unit. At any point in time, if you have any relevant questions, please feel free to email them to us at learningthurs@oasas.ny.gov. That being said, folks, I would like to introduce you to our presenters. Again, Jagruti Shah Bali and Rita Abadi. The training is the intersection of sex trafficking, trauma, and substance abuse. Welcome, ladies, and thank you.
So my name is Jagruti. I work with the Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been with SAVI over 15 years now, and I work with mostly adults right now. I've worked with children in the past, and I provide individual counseling, psychotherapy, and referral and advocacy to survivors of sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, and commercial sexual exploitation. So the mission statement for SAVI. SAVI is a non-for-profit organization founded in 1984. Actually, it was founded on the kitchen table, when three women got together and, were survivors themselves and started to kind of feel the need in the community and started this program. It is a part of the women's movement 30 years ago. So it's really fascinating to be a part of this program, like for the next many years to come. It provides free and confidential services for victims of sexual assault and intimate partner violence and commercial sexual exploitation. So SAVI works towards breaking the silence, actually ending the cycle of sexual assault and intimate partner violence, commercial sexual exploitations. It works throughout, like with the survivors as well as community and other professionals, who are very interested and enthused about this work. One of the things is we also work towards, our goal is to serve our survivors and to the families too. And we work with the survivors as well as secondary survivors we call like family partners, and we also provide services for them in terms of if they need support in our offices as well as in the emergency rooms that we serve. So coming back to our programs, so emergency department services in 7 hospitals in New York City, in Queens as well as in Manhattan. We have advocates, so we do a 40-hour training every year, actually, once beginning soon. And what it is we kind of train these advocates to go into the emergency rooms at these hospitals when survivors present themselves. And they do the initial hand-holding kind of work for the survivors, make them feel safe, help them go through the rape kit, if they need to make a police report, and It's a very good training. It's over 40 hours. Currently, we have over 200 male and female advocates. They speak over 20 different languages. I also want to talk briefly about the Mount Sinai SAFE program, which is called the Sexual Assault Forensic Examiners Program. This is also a 40-hour training, and this training is provided to physician's assistants, nurses, nurse practitioners, and doctors too. And basically, the forensic examiners go into the, they're called in also. They also have an on-call schedule. And when their survivor presents themselves in the emergency rooms, a SAFE examiner is called to kind of do the, perform the sexual assault kit and take all the samples and kind of follow the state protocols for the rape kit. So, we are one of the best hospitals actually at Mount Sinai to provide the services, outreach and training. That's another big component of SAVI. We actually have a whole outreach and training coordinator who coordinates trainings to various schools, police precincts, medical and social service professionals, and the community at large. We all clinicians at SAVI actually from time to time go into the community and talk about prevention and educating the communities about the work that we do at SAVI. We also have a speakers bureau, which is also, like some of the advocates and volunteers who are interested in this work and would like to be, a part of the prevention and training prevention work. They become a part of the Speakers Bureau, and we have trainings for them too. So that's also very, very exciting. SAVI programs. We provide counseling and psychotherapy services. Our services are provided by licensed mental health professionals, specifically trained in trauma, and again, to stress the importance of free and confidential work. We also provide, referrals to our clients in terms of like housing referrals if they need housing, if they need drug treatment, we provide referrals for that. So we work with the communities, other service providers in the community, just not in isolation. We provide a lot of advocacy, especially with, I find that when, with intimate partner violence, where the woman has just left her home and she needs a lot of, hand-holding, so to say, in terms of, working with ACS, working with getting housing, working with, shelter needs, getting her public assistance, all that stuff. And that's very, very crucial, kind of. We also, our clinicians speak several different languages, like Spanish, Portuguese, French, Egyptian, Arabic, Polish, Hebrew, Gujarati, Hindi, Punjabi, and Urdu. For example, I speak, Gujarati, Hindi, Punjabi, and Urdu, so I get a lot of referrals from the South Asian community in Manhattan as well as in Queens. And since I'm in Manhattan, I get a lot of, from the Bronx too. We have locations in Manhattan, which is the main hospital building at Mount Sinai, and the Manhattan Family Justice Center. We have a full-time clinician there. And Queens, we have several different locations. One is at the Queens DA's office, where my colleague Rita is there, and she's at the DA's office as well as at the Queens Family Justice Center. And we have another Spanish-speaking worker. She's at the Family Justice Center as well as Voices Latina. That is in Jackson Heights, which works with, just the Hispanic population there, the Spanish-speaking population there in the community. And we have a clinician at the Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. She's full-time. And there is another social worker. She works at Astoria, Mount Sinai. And she's a clinician too. So basically, that's the coverage in terms of staff. This programs, SAVI programs. the SAFE program, as I explained earlier, the Sexual Assault Forensic Examiners program, the Taconot program, which is working with the Orthodox Jewish community and both sexual assault and intimate partner violence. This was a special grant that Sabi got a few years ago to work with this, this is a very isolated kind of a community. They don't easily come to seeking services, and since they come to the hospital, it's easier for them to kind of seek services and come to us. And the program against commercial sexual exploitation, actually, Rita began the program at the Queen's the District Attorney's Office over 10 years ago now. And we provide individual and group psychotherapy services. We do a lot of intensive case management, court services, referrals, educational and health. Accompany, our survivors to different providers too. I mean, I have got physically myself, to other agencies when my clients do not speak the language, do not speak, English. I have to go with them physically so I can navigate the systems for them. The Queen's District Attorney's Office is a very special program, actually, where we are at the DA's office, and we are not a staff of the DA's office. So we are separate, but we also work together with the legal team. And it's been it's proven to be a very successful model. The New York City Family Justice Centers in Queens and in Manhattan. I'm not sure if, the Family Justice Centers came up a few years ago, started by the mayor's office, where it's like a one-stop place to work with, with survivors of intimate partner violence. So I'm going to give Rita the conversation on sex trafficking.
Hi, my name is Rita Abadi, and I work with the Mount Sinai SAVI program. And around 10 years ago, we officially started the commercial sexual exploitation program at SAVI. Human trafficking, we've been talking a lot about human trafficking, but I think that people have little understanding of what this actually entails. We speak about human trafficking as the modern equivalent of slavery, and actually it shows in so many different ways in our lives. We are talking about not only sex trafficking, that is actually the focus of this training, but also about using people for free labor, forced labor, using kids into wars, and harboring, in the transport of people, either to force them into labor or into sex trafficking. It's a very, very broad kind of definition. And in this presentation, I'm going to start actually from a more general point of view about human trafficking in general, and I'm going to slowly go down into what is happening more in the local terms in the US and also in New York City. There are other examples of sex trafficking human trafficking that you really don't think about. For example, when we go into the Chinese restaurant that is selling food at a very low price, and we don't ask ourselves how are we paying so little for the work in this place, or when we buy something at a very good sale and we end up buying a t-shirt for less than the price of the material. And so what is happening there? That could be work in sweatshops. So it's always very interesting to stop and rethink our frames about what is human trafficking, what is coercion and exploitation of other human beings. The UN had done a very good work into defining human trafficking, but it's a very broad one. And I bring up the definition that they developed because at SAVI we work from a more broad view of human trafficking. Human trafficking, I'm going to read it from the slide, is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of person by means of threat or use of force or other form of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, and of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payment or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. It includes all that I've mentioned before, but why I'm bringing up this is that so many times we are serving a population that maybe does not qualify for the like the US or the local definition of human trafficking. But if someone approached the program and described themselves as being victim of exploitation and being used in some means of, like being coerced into prostitution, we look at this survivor as a sex trafficking survivor. So we don't need, in terms of services, we don't necessarily follow the legal definition to provide free services. Trafficking exists everywhere in the world. We've been more and more aware of what is happening, and there is a lot of movement, like in terms of using people to work or to go into the sex trafficking trade. However, the fact that the definition was based on the trafficking of guns and arms, and that's where the name comes from, the human trafficking. People always connect human trafficking to transport, and this is not necessarily true. We have local human trafficking when we're talking about the commercial sex exploitation of young American girls in New York that are like from New York, and this happens all the time. So it's important to understand that although in many ways the definition talk about movement, sex trafficking doesn't imply into movement. The numbers that are into sex trafficking are humongous, and because this is not reliable in terms of estimates, this is what we believe, and even that this is huge. We are talking about maybe between 4 to 27 million of people that are into servitude. And the numbers are so broad because we really don't know what is happening out there. More recently, I was reading about the problems in ships that are like people that have been kidnapped to work or that were looking for better opportunities, and then they found themselves working to ships, like forced labor into ships that are transporting goods around the world, and there is no law that actually covers this kind of crime. And so all these numbers are estimates. What we know, and that's the number we are working with, that 70% of the trafficked people are women and girls, and 50% are minors. What this is pointing out is that girls are at a higher risk of human trafficking. What are the patterns? What we know is that usually it goes from poor countries into richer countries, but we can think in the same way about poorest area of the US into richest area of the US, and also within the same city when you're talking about maybe the poor neighborhoods into more central neighborhoods, more upcoming neighborhoods. But what we know in the US is that we are receiving, like that usually people are coming from Africa, from Latin America, from certain Middle Eastern countries and Asian countries into, Western Europe, United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, and certain Middle Eastern countries that are receiving countries because of the amount of money that are coming into these countries. So that's the general thing. It doesn't mean that all the movement goes this way, but that's the most general one. The domestic part of human trafficking is what takes place into the same country, and this is important. We tend to believe that the international sex trafficking is larger but the truth is that the numbers of domestic trafficking young girls are much higher than the international numbers. For some reason, there is more attention given to the international push, but the local is really, really important in terms of numbers. What are the push factors? What makes this happen? Basically, economic, political, social vulnerability of the victims, civil unrest, war, natural disasters. So as an example, what we are seeing now is that there is a lot of refugees from Syria that have been pushed into prostitution in other countries where they are trying to find harbor. And what are the pull factors? What brings this up is the global demand for sexual exploitation and cheap labor. Those are the major two ones. This is an actual picture of when there was a raid here in New York, and there was a brothel that was just uncovered by the police, and these young women were rescued. What is exploitation? It starts by an individual, usually a young individual, not only, but mostly, that is lured by promises of a relationship, of employment, of education opportunities, of fashion modeling, or of marriage. It starts in so many different ways, and they can be recruited in many different ways. It could be because there was an ad placed in a newspaper, because a friend told you about this job, and also, there are even kidnapping. Again, kidnapping is not the most common form, but this is it happens. Usually people have in mind that kidnapping is how it happens because this is what we see in movies, but this is not the most common recruitment way. So, as an idea, I'm going to tell 3 very short stories, just how these young women were recruited. Chantal was 12 when she was raped for the first time, and this created a vulnerability that later made her very vulnerable for sex trafficking. So she, as a result of this rape, she got pregnant, and she had this child. She came from a very disrupted house. Her parents were drug users, and she was actually raised by her grandmother. And her grandmother ended up having custody of her child. So she's going to school, and she meets this other young woman in the neighborhood, and he approaches her, and he flirts, and they start a relationship. And a few months after they start the relationship, he approached with the idea of, maybe we can do this, or you can be with my friends for survival. And that's how she was recruited and pushed into the sex trade. So it starts based on a relationship, and that's one of the most common ways. Miranda, she actually is from Mexico, and we are going to see her later on a little clip from a video. Miranda, she was 14 years old, and she is in this very poor part of Mexico, and she's with her friends in the park, and she's talking to her friends, and this other guy approaches and strikes a conversation with them. And he is a little older, not much. He's cute, he's a little older, he has a car, and he starts talking and invite her to go out. And actually he asked her to come back the next day to the same park that is very close to her house. And she's enchanted. And the next day, 14 years old, flirting, she's back into this park. And he talked to her, and then he starts getting late, but he's kind of invites her into his car, and he started driving around because he was gonna take her back home because it's getting late. But he drives around and is further and further and further from her house. He ended up in his own house where he held her back. So he brings her into the house. There is family members there, and she's trying to leave, but she's not allowed to leave. She has no money. We are talking about poverty, no cell phones, and no money, no Metro card. So she had no means to go back because she barely knew where she was. And that first night, she's actually raped, and soon she's forced into prostitution, first in Mexico, and then she's brought through the border into the US. And Rosa has somewhat a similar story, but she was brought into prostitution because she thought she was getting a new job. Also, she comes from a very poor part of Mexico, and she thought she was going to get a job to help support her family. And then she was forced into prostitution, first in Mexico and then in the US. There is a misconception that every foreign has an international case for, but many, many times girls are brought into the US and they live in the US. They are undocumented young women, and they are approached as also a relationship or a job, and then they are forced into prostitution. In this case, this is called domestic trafficking. The reason why sex trafficking is such a growing kind of business is because there is a lot of money attached to sex trafficking. It's the fastest growing type of crime in the world. The numbers for sex trafficking, so we can understand, why we are talking about maybe $500,000 a year, is that one woman is resold every day 10 to like 20, 30 times to John. When we are talking about selling guns or drugs, basically you are able to sell it once. And when we are talking about young women sold into prostitution, we are talking about reselling the same young woman every day 20 to 30 times. And that's why so much money is behind this business. What do we know about the trafficking into the US? We know the US is a destination because of money. And we know that there is an estimate of 14,000 individuals trafficked into the US each year. And this is including sex trafficking and labor trafficking. There is a lot of labor trafficking in farms and in the harvest here in the US, so we need to keep this in mind. And what the State Department is telling us, based on the research they were able to do, is that there is a very large number coming from Asia. There is next to it a number of people trafficked in the US from Eastern Europe. And then the rest is coming from Latin America. So those are basically also the big important immigration groups to the US. So somewhat those trends come together. And I think it's important to take a look at this very short video so you understand what it means to be sex trafficked.
As you can see, you've got beds that are here where they're consummating the prostitution. Just a makeshift type bed with a drape for a little privacy, but not much. This one is actually a room, so it's a little bit more privacy.
So yeah, so there's just basically a mattress, a small bed, and it's this is like a
10 by 10?
10 by 10 room. This is not even finished wall, it's all open up.
Very cheaply built, very, very quick. What we have in places like this, you have a ledger of the girls that work here. As you can see, the X's, these are the amount of tricks that they've done tonight, and they will pay him a fee and grab a napkin, condom, and this gel, and they'll go to the room. See right there's a package of a condom.
And it's just dozens and dozens of men coming in and out of places like this. And women just having
sex, 15 minutes, and just move on to the next guy.
Authorities believe many of these women could be sex slaves, brought to the U.S. from Latin America against their will. They are the merchandise, bought, sold, and traded by a vast international network of human traffickers and pimps. During the raid tonight, the women and their clients are arrested, but the pimps who traffic them here remain free. The sex slave trade is a global business, and the American market is dominated by pimps and traffickers from one Mexican state called Tlaxcala. No place in the world sends more sex slaves to the U.S. And at the center of the trade is one small city of just 10,000 people. Its name is Tenancingo.
Tenancingo has spawned, frankly, a cottage industry of victimization. It's disturbing on many, many levels. They're family-led organizations that specialize in trafficking young girls, prostituting them in Mexico, bringing them to the U.S., forcing them into prostitution here.
The Tenancingo ring has spread throughout the U.S., from the border towns up through Texas and California, from Houston to Atlanta and Miami, and up the East Coast, all the way to New York. The trafficking ring's hub is in Corona, Queens. This is the end of the journey for a lot of girls. Many of them, at some stage, end up held captive in what seem like quiet streets.
So a lot of the sex trafficking is happening right here?
Yes. This is the most concentrated location that, from previous investigation and current investigations, that we have come across human traffickers and rescued many of the victims.
Elvin Hernandez is an investigator for the Department of Homeland Security, which coordinates international anti-sex trafficking operations. He's helped rescue dozens of women from neighborhoods just like this one.
So let's talk a little bit about what is happening in the local level. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act is the federal law in the U.S. that has passed in 2000 and then it's been reauthorized like 4 more times. And it basically focuses on prevention, protection, and prosecution. And the laws are very strict. The federal laws are very strict. And they are basically dealing with the international sex trafficking and also the federal trafficking, like from one state to the other. That's when they are able to charge into federal law. And they have really strong penalties against traffickers. I was able to accompany some of the works, and some of the traffickers were sentenced to 25 years and 20 years, and it's really, really important to see this happening. The only way we are going to be able to actually address is when the penalties are strong enough that people would be afraid of trafficking. So what's happening in New York? New York State actually came down with the law in 2007. So it's like 7 years after the federal law. And it's actually addressing the sex trafficking in New York State, and that's most of the domestic local prostitution, forced into prostitution of young women. And again, very important, it does not involve the movement of victims. This is very important because people sometimes can approach you and say, this is happening to me. And because the person hasn't been transported from one place to the other, they would think that she's not a victim of sex trafficking, but she is. And also, physical confinement is not required. That's again a misconception about sex trafficking. In 2008, we also approved another law that's called the Safe Harbor Law. And this was to line up sex trafficking of minors with sexual consent. Basically, up to 2008, a minor that was forced into prostitution would be arrested on prostitution charges, even if 17 and 11 months, you are not really able to consent to sex. So there was like a step into the law where a young woman couldn't consent to sex, but she could be arrested on prostitution charges. So this was corrected in 2008 with the Safe Harbor Law. In 2010, there is another important law that came down that was the vacating of the prostitution charges. In New York State, the charges stay in your record forever. So what was happening is that after young women were able to escape trafficking and they start trying to get jobs and start to get licenses, go to school, they would apply for jobs and the job would be denied because they had a record, and a record that was about conviction on prostitution charges. So in 2010, the vacation of charges law came down. It was the first one in the country, and it was again in Queens, and it was again the book that we are working with. And basically this would allow this one woman to have jobs and to be able to be self-sufficient. The last change in the law was 2015, very recent, March, where promoting prostitution, that being a trafficker, became a violent felony. What happened before is that it was considered a non-violent felony, so the sentences were much lighter. And when this became a violent felony, now the sentences are heavier. So again, this is a way to deter trafficking. What we know about what's happening in New York City is that the only study that was made a few years ago found 5,000 young women sexually exploited. And for the most part, the young women, they are runaway, they have long histories of sexual abuse, and they usually are running away from bad situations in their houses. And what we know is that most of these young prostituted youth, they have serious post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And what we know is that it's as strong as victims of torture. So POWs and survivors of sex trafficking are the ones who really show the most post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And we know also that the entry age into the life is 13. And kids, it takes just a few hours after kids leave their houses for them to be solicited. And it could be just because they are looking for shelter, so they would exchange sex for shelter. It could be exchange sex for money, they need to eat. And it could be just because, they need food. So it's very, very fast. Trying to leave home because they are in bad situations, that they are thrown into the street to be recruited into sex trafficking. And we talk mostly about the commercial sex exploitation of children because this is a very high-risk situation. Again, the starting age is around 13, 14 here and abroad. So it's really, really important to look at kids and understand what's happening. We haven't yet worked too much to understand what's happening with boys, but we know the problem is out there. We all mostly talk about girls. And also we know that the transgender population is at very high risk because they are ostracized by their family when they are discovering their identity. And it's usually also throughout their teen years. And they are really, really, they need help. Other risk factors is family conflict. We know that when drug problems, school problems, truancy, substance abuse, use of marijuana, all these problems are high risk factors for the commercial exploitation of children. This is a very short video that explains, on the words of one of the survivors, how these young women are coerced, recruited into sex trafficking.
you never realize how much power you have. How much power you have until you're just totally broken and you have nothing left to give. And then it's just like this little flicker within that just, it empowers you. And once it empowers your thought, it can't help but change your reality. I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood with both parents up until adolescence, is when they divorced. Had tons of friends, big tomboy, climbed trees and stopped signs, and I've always been an A student in school. It was a pretty easy, normal childhood up until the point of divorce. My father has always been a protector and the breadwinner, but he was not emotionally evolved. That's something that I always longed for from my father, and the divorce didn't help that. Some of the things that I needed to learn and I needed to receive as a younger girl, those needs began to get greater as I became a teenager, and that was the turnaround. It was actually on one of my first jobs where I met my trafficker. I was 16 going on 17, working as a hostess and learning to serve. And he was a very suave, very well put together, charming man who happened to be 30. And we began to hang out. He would take me home because I obviously didn't have a car. And that turned into gifts here and there on those rides and having conversations, which turned into sex, which then turned into a conversation of having sex with others or a return on his investment.
Victims of sexual exploitation have their minds fooled to think that this lifestyle is the right way to live, just like I believed.
The first occurrence or the introduction into the life, we were hanging out with a few of his friends, which I came to find out they were traffickers also, and hanging out with their girls that they had. And it was through them. It became more of a grooming process where, you know, this is what we do. We hang out, you know, we smoke, we drink, we eat, we have fun, and we go to work, and this is our work, and this is what we do, and, you know, you can make this kind of money. And, you know, in the midst of all of that, my trafficker is telling me how much he loves me and, you know, how important I am to him. And I had to hold him up on that, you know. And so that led to the first time. At the most, my trafficker had 5 girls of all ethnicities. They all came from broken homes in some way, some form, whether there was sexual abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, divorce. It came from every range, as well as financial ranges. Certain voids and certain pieces, when those pieces are missing, and there's this embodiment of, I don't even know the best phrase for it, but they fill that void. The traffickers fill that void. And they're very, very, very intelligent at keying in on what those voids are. So if you didn't have a father, I'll be that daddy. If you've never fallen in love, I will be that first love. And by filling in those blanks, they're giving these young women something they never had.
So this way we can understand how young women are recruited, but also how are they kept there? So from the video you can see that usually traffickers, they are gonna go into recognizing the emotional needs that these kids are having because the parents are not present, the father is not present, they are looking for recognition for someone that loves them. And that's how they start the process. After they are into sex trafficking already, how they are kept there is by the use of very, very specific tactics. Usually the girls are overworked. They work very, very long shifts. They are sleep and food deprived, and sometimes they are forced to use drugs. And never very, very heavy drugs, because we have to think about this, like the mind of the trafficker as a business. If a young girl is using very heavy drugs, she's not going to be able to go back to work the next day. So she needs only to use drugs to the point where she's going to be dissociating from the feelings that the exploitation is bringing, but not to the point where she cannot function. And there is a brainwashing process where she's convinced that this is for them, and this is about love, and this is how actually life is. There is nothing wrong with prostitution. There is nothing wrong with you giving all the money to this male that is going to take care of this money. And also there is a very other process that is very important, is that usually when the girls start in the life, they have their name changed. And this is a way of trying to really destroy someone's identity. You start being called by some other name, you are treated in a different way, and you start belonging to a different kind of family or group of relationships. Other ways of controlling them is either through pregnancy or abortion. Which way? If you get pregnant and the trafficker doesn't want you to have a child, he can force you into an abortion, and that's a way of controlling your body. But on the other hand, if you're trying to escape sex trafficking, having a child with you and having the custody or the care of the child will obligate you to remain in the trade. In the process, there is a lot of rules that they bring down, and this is the way they keep the girls under control. So I would like to tell you a short story again of one of my clients, was that her experience is pretty much a reflection of how this process goes. She was in foster care because of a lot of difficulties in family, and through the foster care system, she met this guy. How this works? She is in a group home. He knows, who is in group homes. Those are kids that for many, many reasons are isolated from their families, have lost their, caretakers. And so he was around the group home, and they met, and he became her boyfriend. And after a while, he proposed to her, to have sex with his friends. And she resists at the beginning, and then he convinced her that this is for love, and she ended up working for him. After a while, she leaves the group home, and because he invites her to live in his house with the other woman that he is exploiting. So they become this family type kind of relationship, where all this young woman, they are sisters-in-law. That's what they call each other. And there is a competition among them that has to do with the competition for his attention and who is able to actually be closer to him. And this whole competition thing works through punishment and reward system. So sometimes he rewards one and not the others. Sometimes, he creates a jealousy and a competition among them, and even a competition about who is the best one, who is the one who can bring more money to the house and to him. So she was caught in this kind of fight. And actually, the way he was treating her at some point, and actually because she was his favorite, is that he was much harsher on her, to the point where at some point the way he punished her was basically by cutting her hair, shaving her hair, and that was very degrading. She had 2 kids with him. It wasn't because the first child she wanted to have, because that was giving her a feeling of being alive, create an attachment, because she had nowhere to go. And the second time, actually, she got pregnant not because she wanted. She was raped and controlled by him, and she had a second child. And this was used by him also as a way to try to keep her into the trafficking, because he would use the excuse of the kids to be able to get to her and try to force her back into prostitution. So just some idea of what are the tactics. There are a lot of others, but this is one clip about how this plays out. We have developed the sex trafficking power and control wheel, and it's a very interesting work model. And it's out there, you can find it online, but it's a good way of thinking the different ways that someone can be controlled. And we're going to talk about coercion, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, sexual abuse, physical abuse, privilege, economic abuse. So each one of those different aspects are going to be controlled by the pimp. And this came out from the work of domestic violence, where we have the power and control wheel of domestic violence, and in some ways they have a lot of similarities, because there are certain dynamics that they repeat from domestic violence that are repeated into sex trafficking. So what are the barriers to services? For the most part, these young women are outcasted from society. They have very limited life skills, so they have no means or no ways, or they don't know about services. They don't really, usually they are not really welcome when they go to services, because they don't have the information, they don't have documents, they don't have the skills, they have no connections, and actually they have sometimes difficulty to be living outside of the life. They don't really know how to relate to the population outside of that environment. It's easy to understand when we think about how the life goes. If they are prostituting, they have a phone, and the phone rings, and they have to be available for the job. It's now or it's never. There is no waiting. So basically, when they are relating to the world, they also don't know how to operate if you have to wait and to postpone something in order to get it. So basically, if they don't get the services, they believe they are not going to receive. If they don't get the services immediately, they don't believe they are going to get the service, and so they are going to be leaving the place. They really feel that people can tell about their lives when they walk into places. So they tend also to isolate themselves. And the other thing is that we do have a very huge misconception about young prostituted women, where we actually judge them if we know what is their life, when we do not understand why they've been there. Other important thing is to understand that so many times they start working because they are forced into, but then when they are able to leave their traffickers, they go back into prostitution because they know no other means of survival. The other thing very, very difficult is as services providers to assess for trafficking. And we've been struggling for many years to try to figure out ways to actually develop an intake, a questionnaire that will be able to grasp when someone is a survivor. And they don't usually disclose it. And for the most part, the way we've been able to get to survivors is through the criminal justice system. They may access services for other reasons, and it's not uncommon that I start talking about, with clients that came to services because of domestic violence, and then they disclose that they've been trafficked. And one of the indications is that their stories are very confused, and there is a lot of gaps, and also they have a lot of the risk factors. And we ask about certain questions like that are like daily life, like, do you have your social security number? They have no idea about social security number. They have no idea where their birth certificate is. So those give some indication that something may be happening. The Polaris Project is a very good organization. They are like in the front lines of the sex trafficking war, and they have developed some questionnaires that would help us to understand what's happening. So they have questions about work and living conditions. Can they come freely? It's like what is happening in their work situation. Do they work long hours? Do they can change jobs? There is restriction at work. So they are working on this frame about how is your work and living conditions to get some information. And they also address issues of safety. That's very important. If you are in a place that don't have access to it, you can get indication of problems there. And if someone is working or start working under false premises, and what is happening with their job now. They also try to assess through mental health and behavior if people kind of are very depressed, are very anxious, have some very high anxiety related to law enforcement, or are unable to establish a contact with you. So what they're doing in this instrument is not about just one thing, it's about in all these areas, some indications that are put together to assess if someone is a survivor of sex trafficking. The other thing is for physical health. Sex trafficking survivors don't have the ability to go for health care. They have no possession, they have no ID, they are unable to move on their own. And also, they have very little idea about what it is, what's happening in the world, where is the family, if they have connections with their family, and their histories most likely are very inconsistent. They change histories all the time about their life and their families. They develop screening questions, and I just wanted to you to have the list, and is the person free to leave, physically, sexually, or psychologically abused, have a passport, what are the paying conditions, do you live at home or near work, how do you get to work, who is a family, there is a person in your family being threatened, do you fear something, someone in your family fears something. So those are just, screening tools that probably is helpful to have when you suspect you might be dealing with someone that is a survivor of sex trafficking.
So it's Jagriti, I'm back again. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the impact of human trafficking at various levels, the social impact, the health impact of human trafficking, and the emotional impact of human trafficking. The social impact of human trafficking, where there is inequity, isolation from mainstream society, problems with law enforcement, where they have, records, they have been arrested for, it could be prostitution, or it could be even, driving, rash driving, or they also have records in other states, because it's they have been, prostituted across the other states, so there are several other records in different states too. A lot of them do not have the lack of life skills to survive, basically, because they've not been taught as children. They have, they've not been given those skills. little work skills because limited education a lot of times, lack of access to legal economies, and lack of work experience. Health impact, big thing too. Physical injuries, traumatic brain injuries. I just recently read an article where, a lot of these women, when they're beaten, we really don't talk about this, where they suffer so many head injuries, and no one talks about this. We talk about other, like through accidents and stuff, but no one addresses this issue, like where they have been, they've been injured in their jobs. Substance abuse disorders, big thing too, where it's very hard to survive, for them in terms of doing this work, where the trauma is so much, is they're re-traumatized over and over again. Health issues, STD, HIV, untreated chronic health conditions. It could be just like a minor cough, and it just gets untreated, and there's so much any other complications. OBGYN issues, pregnancies, wanted, not wanted. There's no proper prenatal care. They don't even know sometimes that they're pregnant, and they just kind of find out through just lack of draw, and then there they are in our offices, and we are coordinating services for them. Miscarriages, forced again, or just happens. Emotional impact of human trafficking. Here I would just kind of define post-traumatic stress disorder. Impulse to revisit traumatic events, intrusive emotions and memories, flashbacks, hyperarousal, startled reactions, eating and sleeping disorders, hypersexualization too. There's also difficulty with self-regulating their emotions, their feelings, and what they think, even their thought processes. There's a lot of self-harming behaviors. It could be like cutting, or just rash driving, and suicidal behavior, suicidal thoughts, dissociative disorders, because the trauma sometimes starts so early, and if it's so repeated, not just the sexual abuse, because there's also physical neglect, there is emotional neglect, and poverty, which is the biggest thing. There's a lot of anxiety and depression, isolation and trust issues. Big thing, they don't even trust us when they come to our offices, they don't tell us. Like I just began working with this young woman, and the first session she came and she said that, she just lost her job, and that's when she started, prostituting. And then 4 sessions later, she tells me, I've been doing this over a year. And so this is very, common practices. And sometimes they just don't tell us. That's okay too, because, we are there to support them in the best form they tell us to. Bonding with the perpetrators. This is called traumatic bonding. This is very, very important actually. And why this traumatic bonding with the perpetrator? Because there is most of the time, there is an imminent threat to life, their life. There is also a perceived threat of there is kindness. The trafficker is also doing a lot of huge favors, like it could be just buying them a dress, getting them dressed up, sending them to Macy's to get a makeup or something. It's a big thing for them. They think it is being very kind. And also, they think that they cannot escape from the trafficker. It's like never. They feel this is it, that's their life and this is what it is. And there is also perceived physical and psychological threat, and there is also big isolation, as Rita was talking earlier in some of the client cases where she talked about.
So this is a cut of our limbic system, and what the limbic system does is to regulate the emotional life, regulate the survival behaviors like eating, reproduction. Memory also is influenced by the limbic system and the autonomous nervous system. Why this is important? When we when we are responding to any stress, we activate our limbic system. What is the normal response? If our body judges a situation as being stressful or not stressful, this is what helps us survive. So decision is made on a sensory input. The best example is to think about if I'm walking and I see a snake. So my sensory system, is the limbic system that is responding immediately as this is dangerous. Or maybe if I'm walking on the streets and I see a bird, my system is telling me this is not dangerous. So we are making this decision in a level that we don't really are aware of it. It's just a very fast response. So let's say there is stress. I saw a snake. What happened is that my autonomic nervous system is activated, and is going to prepare myself to defend. So that's how we feel our heart going off, and we are prepared to run, and we are just trying to resolve this. But then I look really, and I see that there is no harm. There is no snake, actually, it was just a shape. So what happened is I have another system in my body that is going to deactivate this. This is a parasympathetic system, and we are going to go back into the previous state. This is the recovery process. So this is all normal, and that's how we protect ourselves on a daily basis. This is a diagram of this process. There is a neurofeedback into the hypothalamus. Cortisol, that everything is okay, and we come back into the resting system. But what happens if the situation is actually in danger? Is that this system is activated, and the cortisol that I've mentioned before, that is the feedback response system, is not produced in the same level of a person that doesn't have PTSD. So when I'm activating this system all the time, I'm hyper-aroused. And my body doesn't understand when I'm not in danger that I'm not in danger. And I keep on not producing enough cortisol to be able to rest my body and go back into the previous restful state. So that's what happened in a very short way with people that have post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's why when there is any trigger, the whole system is activated as an alarm reaction. People are reacting as if the danger is happening all over again. One of the responses that we can have naturally when a danger is around us is to either fight or freeze. Those are the three basic responses that happen when something is happening around us. So basically, the flight response is my body gets ready, I find a way to be able to escape, so we run off. And we all have done this when we jump after something is happening. There is a fight response also. That is when I am ready to fight and I see my heart pounding and I can defend myself. If I find time to defend myself, I'm gonna fight. Some other times, there is a third response that is freezing. When animals in the wild don't find any way out, they actually freeze their bodies and fall. And this is also a very common response after a sexual assault. It's very common to hear from sexual assault survivors and sex trafficking survivors that every time they are raped, they have a freeze response. And the freeze response indicates that people are dissociating. And this is what actually brings one of the worst outcome in terms of trauma, when we cannot connect to our feelings, and that's why we get depressions, we get this difficulty to dealing with emotions, difficulty to be regulating our emotions. The PTSD actually is a chronic activation of this system by the limbic system even after the threat has passed. So basically what I'm saying is that when someone is a survivor of trauma, they are eternally being aroused by something that is not happening at the moment. So they are living in the past situation, not in the present situation. In this sense, we are going to see that a lot of sex trafficking survivors and trauma survivors are using substances. And the reason is that people are feeling either very aroused or very depressed. And they are trying to deal with these very bad feelings in a way that is probably not the healthiest one, but is the one that they find as a survival mode. Basically, one of the theories that is the most common in terms of the overlap between post-traumatic stress disorder and substance use is that survivors are self-medicating. Basically, they are trying either to deal with, they are either trying to deal with depression, so they're trying to use an upper to feel better, or they are dealing with this arousal and this state of alert all the time, and so they're going to try to use a substance that is going to push down all these feelings of arousal. The other theory about comorbidity between post-traumatic stress and substance abuse is the other way around, that because people have substance abuse, they usually tend to expose themselves to a lot of different high-risk situations, because actually they are high. They might be on the streets, they might be in a situation where they have no control over what's happening. And that's why they end up developing post-traumatic stress disorder, because they are re-traumatized because of the regular use of drugs. The other theory about the comorbidity about substance abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder is about a susceptibility that is natural in the body, and that this increased anxiety and arousal is usually accompanied by substance abuse. What most of the studies indicate is that this high comorbidity between post-traumatic stress disorder and substance abuse is coming from a PTSD onset. So that, for the most part, the research are indicating that people go into substance abuse because they have been traumatized before the use of substances. And it's usually to alleviate the symptoms that they end up choosing drugs. And the drug is used as a way to self-regulate these very bad feelings that are coming from trauma. If we can imagine someone that cannot escape the pain of a rape, the pain of the sex trafficking, and they are just like, they are overwhelmed by those feelings, so they're trying to find some ways to hold it. And it could be also, we don't usually talk too much about use of painkillers, but those can be also another kind of use to try to control the pain of the trauma.
Treatment. So I'm basically going to be talking about two models. One is this Judith Herman model of trauma treatment, and it has basically 3 stages of recovery. It talks about safety, mourning, and reconnection. And I kind of love this model because it's very simple. It kind of really explains, it kind of talks about, trauma and trauma treatment, especially very good for beginning therapists. And even I love it too. I even go back to it because it is very helpful to, from a treatment. Some of the reactions, difficulties for trauma survivors. There is emotional numbing. There is difficulty in regulating emotions and impulses, anger and aggression. There's substance abuse disorder, behavioral addictions like porn, gambling, a lot of it. There is self-harming behaviors, cutting, burning, and dissociation, of course, where they kind of lose time, spacing out. A lot of my clients, even if if they have a 1 o'clock appointment, they'll show up at 2 o'clock. It's just how it works for them. And I still see them, even for the time, I make time for them because I know I have to see them. So in any treatment, stage 1, which is safety, where you're helping your client establishing, an internal safety as well as an external safety. And internals, one of the things is getting the roadmap of the healing process. What you're really going to work with, what is, some of the goals that you're setting for treatment. Establishing safety and stability in one's own body, one's relationship with self and others, tapping into developing one's inner strength and other resources available for healing. That's very important. And because they don't think that they think this healing will take place something outside of themselves. But no, really the healing is inside of our own selves. And the therapy and the work that we do with our clients is basically that, is helping them uncover their own inner strengths. And the resources are there in terms of whatever it could be me, or it could be like, helping them get to a yoga session, for example, teaching them how to meditate and other things where it helps them regulate their feelings and their emotions. Developing strength skills for managing painful and unwanted experiencing, and minimizing unhelpful responses to them. I think that's very, very key to just helping these women who come to us. Just minimizing the unhelpful responses and helping them get them healthy ones. The first stages also may involve addressing, problems with alcohol or drugs, depression, because it's there. Like the client that I was talking to you earlier, she's just beginning to get like trauma memories where she was sexually abused as a child, and she said she's feeling depressed and she's getting flashbacks, she's getting panic attacks when she's in the shower, she's having trauma memories. Taking medication, there's a lot of education that goes into that, that they don't have to take this other stuff like the alcohol or the drugs or painkillers, but seek a proper psychiatrist and get them proper medications, which is more appropriate for their symptoms. Participating in dialectical behavior therapy, which was developed by Marsha Lindenham. She's a psychologist, and where there is it's a very structured treatment, where they are helped with, tolerating and helping them regulate their emotions, regulating effectiveness and self-harming behaviors. Stage 2, remembering and mourning. I think that's a very important piece. Reviewing and discussing trauma memories to lessen their emotional intensity, to revise the meaning of one's own life and identity. I think working through grief, unwanted or abusive experiences and their negative effects on one's life. Mourning or working through grief, good experiences one did not have, but they all deserve. They really did not have, a lot of them don't have a great childhood, where there's childhood full of love and care. And we all have to kind of mourn it and let it go, because we're not going to get it back. We're not going to, but have to kind of being able to move on and see if they can fill themselves psychologically, emotionally, help them fill themselves with love and care and a lot of self-care, Stage 3, which is reconnection, The third stage focuses on reconnecting with people, meaningful activities, and other aspects of their life. It's helping them live more a healthier life. That's what I help them with. Okay, so the seeking safety model, which was developed by Lisa Najavitz, and then I've kind of used this model with trauma survivors and actually any self-harming behaviors. Could be substance abuse, could be cutting, could be eating disorders, and name it. In any model, and seeking safety or the Judith Herman model, they all talk about safety. Safety first. You're first establishing safety with your clients. When they walk into your office, you're going to make them feel safe. And the internal and external safety that I talked about earlier. The 4 content areas, safety is the number 1 priority. A focus on ideals, because a lot of times it's the clients or patients, they have lost hope, kind of, and really it's helping them establish that ideal. What do they want? The 4th content area of the seeking safety model is the cognitive, the behavioral, interpersonal, and case management, and paying attention to the therapeutic process. Anywhere that kind of happens is this relation, I feel, is the relationship between the patient and the clinician. It's the relationship. The healing takes place in the relationship. And of course, the safety we all provide to our clients. The seeking safety model, patients receive treatments for both the disorders, the PTSD, the sexual abuse, as well as the substance abuse or any of the self-harming behaviors. Integration is ultimately an intra-psychic goal for patients as well as the system's goal. Consent to seeking safety provides opportunities for a patient to discover connection between the 2 disorders and influencing the healing process. Integration also occurs at the intervention level. Setting boundaries can be applied, and I think it's very important to kind of letting your clients know what you can do for them and what you cannot do for them. Focus on ideals, as I was saying, found that when we give our clients some kind of hope that life is not all bad, and they are able to create that positive meaning in their lives, they'll fare better than clients who do not. Many clients report feeling more about a loss of ideas such as trust, big thing, than feeling about a particular extended condition such as a loss of a job or poverty. With individuals who substance, there is also a loss of ideas. Something better needs to be offered in replace of the loss. For content areas, as I said, CBT, the basis of this treatment meets the need of the first, safety first. Behavior topics. Patients are encouraged to come into action. Very important. Listen to patients' behavior, then their words. Interpersonal aspects of the treatment. It's very kind of helping them understand or kind of come to a place how they can have more supportive people in their lives and letting go of destructive people that are not helpful. Case management. Do this a lot, actually. We're helping them connect, with other service providers which will best suit their needs. Attention to therapeutic process, building an alliance, having compassion for patients using various coping skills in one's own life, giving them control is inherent in trauma and substance abuse. And it's also important to get feedback to patients about their treatment. It's their treatment, it's not your treatment. And as I said, the healing takes place in the relationship. And even if one of the things if the seeking safety model is, they could be abusing substance outside, I always make it very clear, for example, that they cannot come to my session under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And that's okay. If they cut themselves, but we can talk about the cutting. And that's the safety and the stuff the safe space I provide in the relationship. Additional features of this treatment, of the seeking safety treatment, using of additional educational research strategies, focus on potential rather than pathology, attention to language, very important, relating the material to client's life, patient's life. Clinical realism is what can be achieved and what cannot be achieved. It's very important, like when you are in a session with your client, what's achievable as what's not achievable. Timing of the session is of essence. You have to have a structure, making treatment interesting, and substance use disorder as a priority. What's not part of the seeking safety treatment model is exploration of past trauma and interpretive psychodynamic work. One of the key things that Lizanna Javits talks about is, in the seeking safety model, there is, we need to establish kind of a safety first in terms of having, taking care of the substance abuse first, then only, kind of being focused on the interpretive psychodynamic work of, past trauma and how the trauma has impacted their lives and, how it's affecting their lives now. So there's a limitation to, this model in terms of the work, treatment format, choices among different topics. There are like 25 different topics, and you can look at this Lizanna Javits book, on seeking safety. It's there, and she talks about like 25 topics, and I'll kind of run only like short-term groups where I've used like 12 topics, and I also integrate it with other treatments, like I refer my clients if they need like to a substance abuse program, encourage them to attend Alcohol Anonymous or a eating disorder group, so there you have to kind of think out of the box and what's best for the client. Cognitive topics, PTSD, taking back your power, compassion, when substance abuse controls you, creating meaning, discovery, integrating the split self, recovery thinking, behavioral topics. I think taking good care of yourself, and nurturing, self-nurturing, grounding. That's a big one. I like that. It's really kind of helping them when they're in the midst of their flashback and they have traumatic memories. How can you help them? Making them feel safe, and then they're here. The trauma's not happening right now. Like this client, she was in the shower and she started to get flashbacks about what had happened to her. She felt like someone was behind her while she was in the shower, and she just began to calm herself down and said, well, I'm not a child there. I'm an adult. I'm in the shower. I'm in my shower. And she was slowly able to kind of bring herself, calm herself down and bring her outside the shower, and then come out and talk to her sister about what had happened to her, what had come up for her. Interpersonal topic, honesty, asking for help, setting boundaries in relationships. Very important when we teach our clients also how they can set boundaries, in relationships with others around them, who have been destructive or not helpful to them. Combination, the life choices, game determination. Ending is also very important. How you plan your ending with your clients, where how and when they're ready, preparing them, and helping them, what are they going to do after the therapy ends, after my work with them ends. The treatment format with the treatment format of Lisa and the Lisa and Javits model, seeking safety, may be applicable to patients with the PTSD and substance disorder, is highly structured. Patients do not necessarily have to meet full formal criteria of current PTSD and substance abuse disorder. And important is that the therapist gives feedback and reinforces the client's progress. Very important, and very important, what they've achieved, what they were able to they were able to achieve. That is very important. If they were able to call an appropriate person there when they were having, the urge to smoke a joint or to shoot heroin. It's very important. The session format for seeking safety. Check-in. It's only 5 minutes. And these are some of the questions in the first check-in, like how are you feeling? What coping skills have you done? Any substance abuse or unsafe behavior? Any commitment that they had from any previous sessions? Any community resource update that they kind of called or they seek to get help for themselves. Each session also begins with the quotation, like if the topic is safety. There's a quote for every session, which is said, for safety, for example, the topic is safety. Although the world is full of suffering, it's also full of overcoming it. So here, it's like a free-floating thing where clients kind of just give their thoughts and their feelings on what this quote means to them. It really kind of gives you an idea as to where they are at, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. So it helps me just to know them more better and see how I can go with this. The session format, relate the topic to patients' lives, where if it's safety, for example, again, how are they going to keep themselves safe? What are some of their thoughts? So we will go over like a list of things where they will kind of talk about how they are not keeping themselves safe and how they can keep themselves safe. And this is a handout where I give it to the patient and we work together in the session. We actually go over all the topics, that's there. And it's very structured. The checkout is also for 5 minutes. The clients have to name one of the things that they got out of the session today, comment on any problem about the session, or they didn't like, they liked, and if they have to make a commitment or a new commitment, like say they would be calling an AA sponsor, if that's what, that they felt that in order to feel safe, they needed to call and have an AA sponsor. So they will work on working on getting that during that week. So just before I go into kind of ending and the big picture and everything, I just want to talk about a case, just to integrate the models and integrate my thinking actually of this, the Judith Harmon or the seeking safety. This is a client that I got from a substance abuse program actually, and she also had a history of child sexual abuse, substance abuse, and trafficking. In her case, her father was the trafficker, and she needed the drugs, and he provided her, provided her with the money, so to say, if she, did the prostitution part. She really was found on the streets, like in a very bad state, and picked up and taken to the hospital. And later on was placed into this residential treatment center for substance abuse. She, over a period of time, she was able to kind of establish eliminate the substance abuse. She was she was on methadone, and she was doing okay. She was stable, and then as she was in the women's group there, she began to talk about her sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, multiple rapes, and that's how she came to me. That was the initial discussion, and that's how she came to me. And I'd really to kind of talk about, like, okay, whatever you tell me kind of stays with me, establish confidentiality, making her feel safe, and talking about, like giving her basic psychoeducation about post-traumatic stress disorder. She really could not understand why she was getting this panic attacks, why she was having this memory. She was not even clear about this memory. So the memories that she was having, we began to talk about, this is from your childhood, helping her separate, this is all the trauma that you suffered. It's not like some fiction that you're creating, because she was very confused. She did not want to believe that her father was, sexually abusing her. And we kind of established a lot of safety. We established a lot of the ground rules, boundaries, making her if she came 15 minutes late for her sessions, I missed the bus, I had no one, and I started to kind of structure the sessions also, okay, you came in 15 minutes late, we're going to only have this much, the 30 minutes of the session. So she started to learn that, and she started to come on time for her sessions. And it was basically like teaching a child, okay, these are the few things that need to be in order, and how can you take care of yourself, like eating, sleeping, resting. So basically that's where we are in treatment with her, and it's a slow recovery, but we'll get there. And to kind of just reintegrating the big picture, the substance abuse. It's important to kind of have some kind of support around the substance abuse. There has to be kind of some amount of abstinence from the substance to do some trauma work. Then, of course, reducing the PTSD symptoms in terms of flashbacks, panic attacks, anxiety. In her case, we had to also help her get a psychiatrist and see, instead of abusing the substance, she needed to be on medication, getting her a diagnosis, for example, increasing safety, any other self-harming behaviors, IPV and HIV risk, educating about. It's a lot of psychoeducational work. Resources, you can call us at SAMI, which is 212-423-2140. And there are other resources. I'm not sure, Rita, if you wanted to talk about any one of them.
We have developed a directory of services that is for New York City, but so this is the first one. But there is also a directory from RIA that is statewide, and you can also contact the U.S. Attorney's Office. And the Polaris Project has something very important. They have the national hotline that they respond to, and you also can text. So this is a good number to give to anyone that you think is in need of help to escape sex trafficking. And so it's 233. You have to text. Be free. That is 233-733. And the Polaris Project is really, really a very good contact point if also you want to refer someone that is out. We have New York State referrals here, but the Polaris Project work nationally. And this is my contact information, and that you can use too. And you can be calling the program, emailing, or contacting everyone. The most important thing is to actually get help for those that are in need.
And again, thank you for joining us. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions regarding Learning Thursdays, feel free at any time to send them to us at learningthurs@oasas.ny.gov. Once again, this is Patty. Thank you and enjoy your day. Bye now.